How many of you own a cell phone? How many of you use your cell phone to send text messages? Isn't texting great? I don't know who invented it or how long it's been around, but the thing I like about texting is it's very direct. If you want to send a message or someone wants to send you a message, it's like right to the point, right? It's not usually a lengthy message, or I guess some people go on and on. But really, if you want to send a longer message, you want to email, or you might do this crazy thing like use your cell phone to call somebody and talk to them. But texting's direct and to the point. You know, if you want to know what time dinner is, what time is dinner? Or, send me a copy of that report. And that's it. And the thing I love about the way Jesus taught was he was often direct. And even though they didn't have texting back then, sometimes his responses to questions were text-like. And I'm thinking now in terms of something he said in Matthew's Gospel, the 22nd chapter. And he's dealing with some of the religious people of his day. He's talking to the Sadducees and Pharisees. These were Jewish groups who had a lot of laws, and they weren't sure what to make of Jesus at that point. And so in this chapter, they encounter Jesus, and they ask him, which is the most important commandment? They're trying to figure out where he's coming from. And Jesus gives his direct text-like response. And I'm looking now at Matthew 22, beginning at verse 34. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested Jesus with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And they had lots of laws. Many more than the 10 Commandments, lots of laws. Jesus replied, Jesus pulled out his cell phone. No, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Boom. There you go. Got a whole big book called the Bible, lots of teachings. What's most important? Love the Lord your God with your all. That's number one. Then he mentions a second most important commandment. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So there you have it. In a short message to the point, these are the two things that are most important for us to do as people of God, as human beings, really. Love the Lord with your all and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, sometimes the church struggles to interpret that or live that out. And so that people outside the church get the wrong impression of who we are. Or maybe they get that impression because we send that message to people. This sermon is the second of three where I'm kind of looking at the question, what's wrong with the church? Why aren't more people coming to church? Why doesn't everybody want to be here on Sunday morning? Well, there's reasons for that, and a study was done, and I referred to the study last week, where they asked a lot of young Americans why they don't come to church, why they've never joined a church. And the responses that they got were things like, I feel judged when I come, I feel like I'm getting lectured, I feel like church people are a bunch of hypocrites, and I feel like the God that the church talks about doesn't relate to my life, and so they don't come to church. So if we as the church hear that, we might then want to say, is there something we're doing wrong that people are getting that impression? Do we want to change the way we live and the way we talk about God and the way we live out our faith if that's the sense that people are getting about us? And I want to suggest this morning that there are some things that we can do to give people a different impression. Because if what God has for us is to love him first and love others, and people are getting this kind of impression where they're turned off, then we've got some growing to do as a church. Because if we're pushing people away and not drawing them to Christ, then we're doing the opposite of what we really want to do. So this morning I want to lift up 4 things the church can do. We can do it individually, as a person in a church, or as a congregation. These are things that we can do. And I've laid them out in the insert that you have in your bulletin, and they're really all related to love. And the hymn we just sang, Pass It On, is about knowing God's love and then, passing it on. But How do we do that? It's not just by our words, it's by our demeanor, it's the way we behave, the way we treat people. So the first thing I want to mention is radical hospitality can really make a difference. Hospitality is the kindness that you show when someone comes to your home or to some other event or to church. Radical hospitality is going beyond regular hospitality. So what I'm talking about is not just having more ushers posted at the door or having better quality donuts at coffee time. I'm talking about a church that takes a sincere interest in other people, whether it's guests that come on Sunday morning or through other activities in the life of the church, or whether you're in ShopRite and you see somebody that you've recognized has been coming to the church the last few weeks and you go over to speak to them. Radical hospitality means an authentic welcome, really taking an interest in another person. And part of that could be getting to know their name. Do you do that when you see somebody you know is new? Go over to them, introduce yourself, get their name. There's a risk in that, isn't there? You're going to remember their name if you see them the next time? Or you're going to have to do the old, hey, how are ya? You're back. It's great. I know most people I know, I won't say us all, because some of you probably are really good with names, but a lot of us struggle with names, and I know that that's hard. And the person that you see the second time and you've forgotten their name, they probably struggle with names too. So there's no harm in saying, I know we met and I'm so bad with names, tell me your name again. And then scurry back to your pew and write it down on your bulletin if you have to. But you know how it feels when somebody remembers your name. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel important. It makes you feel like you've been recognized and acknowledged. And so that's what it means to offer radical hospitality, to go above and beyond and really reach out to people who are not always here, people who may be guests or who have just started to attend church or attend other activities, maybe somebody in a small group that you're a part of. Sometimes this means talking to people who may believe differently than you. The example I used in the sermon notes is that you may get talking to somebody and they're all pumped up because they believe in the power of horoscopes and crystals. And you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, this is terrible, this person's going to hell, and but you can still talk to them. Even if you don't believe, hospitality means recognition, warmth, extension of love. It doesn't necessarily mean acceptance of what they believe. You can love them and not necessarily love what they believe. But if you take an interest in them, develop some kind of relationship and ongoing conversation, they may be willing to hear what you have to say and what you believe. But that may never happen if you dismiss them summarily at the beginning of your time of talking to them. So radical hospitality means an authentic welcome. If they start coming to church, they're probably not going to believe the exact same as you if you've been coming to church for a couple years or for 40 years. They're at a different place in the faith journey. And offering real hospitality means recognizing that and knowing that it's okay. Well, the second one's related to the first in a way, and that's fearless conversation, engaging in fearless conversation, which means listening carefully and asking questions of a person and listening to their questions. And sometimes a person's questions, when they're not yet mature in their faith, their questions may seem a little offbeat to you or even a little bizarre. I mentioned a few in the notes, like, are there pets in heaven? Is your dog going to be there when you get there? If you're a pet lover, you're probably saying, I'm counting on it. I'm hoping so. But do we really know? It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to wonder about it. You don't have to have the exact answer. It may be the kind of thing that people outside the church are wondering. And so it's a point of conversation. And if you're not afraid to have the conversation, it can be a point of contact and a point of engaging. How can I forgive somebody who hurt me? Are angels for real? These are some of the things that people wonder about. Are we willing to have those conversations? I think about the way Jesus had conversations. There was a guy named Nicodemus who wanted to talk to Jesus. He met him at night because he didn't want anybody to see him talking to Jesus. And Jesus got talking to him, and he talked about, this is where this idea of being born again comes from, this passage in John 3. And Nicodemus said, born again? He said, do I have to go back in my mother's stomach and be born again, And Jesus took the time to talk to him and help him understand what that means. And Jesus was fearless in that kind of conversation. And when he, at another point, met a woman at a well, and she had come to the well to get water, and so they started talking about water. It was a common subject, and from there, Jesus developed the relationship and the conversation to talking about a different kind of water, a water that springs up eternally in us, talking about faith and salvation. But Jesus wasn't afraid to have those hard conversations. The third way that we can love on other people is just expressing genuine humility. Not a false humility, but a genuine humility. And I think that humility comes from realizing that we're all on the same plane. There's the old saying, leading someone to faith is like one beggar telling another one where to find bread. It's not like we're super Christian, and if you stick with me, I'll show you, and you'll get to be like me. I don't see that as what Jesus is calling us to do or to be, but rather to say or come across to someone else, I'm on a journey, and I'm still learning and growing and reading the Bible and praying and trying to discover God's will. And, I welcome you to come alongside of me and join me in the journey, and we can learn together. Genuine humility. It's meeting people on an equal plane, meeting them where they are. Nobody likes a know-it-all, someone who acts like they've got it all together, they've got all the answers. There's no room there for the exploration of doubts. And that's why people are often turned off by a church person that has that kind of attitude. If they've got questions, they want to find a place where they can go to explore those questions, to ask them and not be made to feel like they're dumb or that their questions are not real or not important. The Apostle Paul, I thought, did a great job of modeling these first three when he was speaking to some people. That is recorded in the book of Acts, chapter 17. Paul was talking to some people who did not believe like he did, but he wanted to share his faith with them. But he knew enough to know that he had to first recognize their search for truth. And based on that, he could then talk to them about what he believed. And this is the account. It's in the chapter 17 of the book of Acts. He's in Athens, and it says at verse 22, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus, and he said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.'" And he went on to tell them about that God that they seemed to be wanting to know. So my point is that when he was with them, he didn't start out by saying, "You people are dumb. You're worshiping these other gods and these statues. Pfft, let me tell you how it is." Instead, he said, "I've been walking around, and I noticed that by all these statues and monuments you have, you are very religious people." And in that sense, he's saying, you're religious, I'm religious, you're looking for the truth, I'm looking for the truth, we've got some common ground. And after recognizing them and giving validity to their search, he says, let me share with you what I've come to know about what you might refer to as the unknown God. And then he goes on and talks about how Christ changed his life and made a difference, showing that he was willing to have a fearless conversation, that he was willing to be humbled in this experience and to consider their feelings and offer hospitality in that sense. And finally, the fourth way of demonstrating love to those who may be outside the church or on the perimeter of the church, it's learning to live in the mystery and wonder of God. It's realizing that although the Bible's a big book and we can read it and learn great things about God's nature, There's still things we don't know. And that's part of the journey, is living in that mystery. When God spoke through the prophet Isaiah, he said, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. There's a big gap there. We don't know exactly the mind of God. We follow by faith, not by fact. And it's by following by faith that we keep coming back to God and develop that dependence on God. And that's the kind of relationship God wants to have with us, so that we can be close, leaning on him and depending on him. So the question is, can we accept the things that we can't explain? Can we live within the mystery and be okay if we can't just absolutely button down everything and know the absolute answer to everything? You know, one of the great mysteries of the Bible is something as simple as Jesus being born in Bethlehem. God coming down. You know, it says in John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his home among us. How can it be that the God of the universe, the God that made everything, came down in Bethlehem, was born as a baby? He was God, he was man. You know, how do we understand all that? We do the best we can, but we do well to live in that mystery and leave room in that mystery for some of the questions, so that we remain humble and we remain open to dialogue with other people who may have some very, very good questions. Well, these are just 4 responses that we can offer to people who may be searching like we're searching, may not be at the same place that we're at in the journey. I think one of the things that I hope for myself and for you and for our church is kind of grows out of the story of a man and 2 horses. This is a guy that lived out in a rural area, and there was a farm just up the road, and he would often drive by the farm. And when he did, he noticed that there were 2 horses that always seemed to be together in this fenced-in area. But it wasn't until he went for a walk one day and got up close to the horses that he realized something. He got up close and he looked at the horses, and the one horse he could tell was blind. Just by looking at the horse's eyes. I guess it was an older horse, and cataracts had just kind of taken over and his eyes were white. The horse was blind. But the horse was always near this other horse that had a bell around its neck. And as the man stood there for a while and watched the 2 horses interact, he realized that wherever the horse with the bell went, the blind horse followed, and was able to follow because even though he couldn't see, he could hear the bell, and he knew where his friend was. And the man said as he watched the 2 horses, it was as if the horse with the bell was looking after the blind horse, coming alongside of him and helping him to know the way and encouraging him to follow alongside. And the man said when he noticed all this, he saw a spiritual dimension to this, as he thought about how the owner of that old blind horse didn't put him down, but instead loved him as he was and found a comfortable place for him to live. And how God does the same for you and me. He cares for us even though we're broken, even though we don't always live like we should, even though things may not always be right in our life. He still cares for us and has a place for us, and even sends someone into our lives who has a bell, who can show us the way. Someone that we can follow, someone who can befriend us, and someone who can lead us. And my hope and prayer for you and for me is that we can be that kind of friend, that we can have the bell. And we can say we don't have all the answers, but we have a direction in life where God's touched our lives, and let me show you what that looks like, and invite someone who may be blind to the truth, has not yet come to know who Jesus really is. Invite them to come alongside, that we might walk together and grow together. And my prayer is that this will be that kind of church. That when people come to our events, that they'll find that there's an openness here, there's a willingness to have difficult conversations, and there's a love and acceptance that can lead to that person no longer being blind, but finding their way in faith. Oh Lord, may it be so. Help us not to be pride-filled. Help us to know that we're on a journey, and we've got things that have yet to be learned, and we have a blindness to a degree, and we're still looking to grow and praying that you'll open our eyes, even as people who are new to the faith or yet to find faith may be feeling the same way. So, Lord, may this be a place where your love is lived out, where those 2 commandments are known and practiced in the best ways possible. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Let's stand and close in song together.